over at 97.3 ESPN.com. And, John, as you write, that still to this day, he is a guy that is thought to as maybe as good as we've ever seen on the defensive side of the ball.
Yeah, and I think that's really Buddy's legacy, tremendous innovative defensive mind. But, when you talk about him in Philadelphia, specifically, Mike, it's interesting how much he's loved compared to, say, an Andy Reid, who had far more success with a more well-rounded head coach. But I think it talks to really the identity of the city and the blue-collar-ness, the toughness, and the fact that they identified with Buddy Ryan in defense. And I think even if you fast forward to the Chip Kelly era and the high-speed, up-tempo offense, I don't think that's what the people of this city want. They always wanted the hard-nosed defense. Buddy gave it to them, and for that, he'll always be loved in this city.
Right, and as we kind of talked about throughout the day, we recognize him here as the head coach of the Philadelphia Eagles, who kind of changed the way fans view this franchise, the way this fan base became more rabid and kind of, molded the personality of a fan base. But as you write at today's pigskin.com, that many people may not be aware of that remember him as Eagles head coach, he started his career in Buffalo. He was a part of the Minnesota teams and helped spearhead the Purple People Eaters, and obviously the 85 Bears that won the Super Bowl. There were a lot of things that he did to get him to Philadelphia.
Yeah, he really did, and obviously it's the 85 Bears, because even if you talk to people around the NFL today, it's almost a default setting. Is that right? If you talk about the great defenses of all time, the first thing that's out of everybody's mouth is the 85 Bears, and that was Buddy Ryan in the 46 defense, and just the aggression, and the 46 came from Doug Plank's number, who's sort of a hybrid safety linebacker. He always had 8 people on the line of scrimmage. He was always forcing the issue, and he brought that to Philadelphia. And if there were better, more well-rounded teams when he was with the Eagles, that defense of Reggie White, Jerome Brown, we all know the names, Seth Joyner, Clyde Simmons, Eric Allen, on and on and on, that would be considered amongst the great 5 or 10 defenses of all time. Unfortunately, they weren't well-rounded enough. It was really Randall Cunningham and not much else on offense, and it never got to that level. But when you talk about dating all the way back, as you mentioned, the Purple People Eaters in Minnesota, the fact that he was the defensive line coach under Bud Grant with Alan Page and Carl Eller and Jim Marshall, and then it goes to the Bears with, as we said, the greatest defense of all time, and then the Reggie White Eagles. There's a very, very short list, and if you're doing a Mount Rushmore of defensive minds in the NFL, Buddy Ryan is going to be on it.
John, do the Bears win that Super Bowl 20 without Buddy Ryan?
No, they don't. And it's funny because he and Mike Ditka never really got along, and that was part of the reason. He wasn't Ditka's guy. If you remember, when the Bears brought Mike Ditka in, the entire defense, Buddy was already there. They wrote a letter to George Halas to say, keep Buddy Ryan. We need him. We're on the crux of being one of the great defenses in this league. He listened, and Mike Ditka and Buddy were kind of stuck with each other, and they didn't get along. But let's be honest, that was a defense-first team, and basically number one in every single meaningful statistical category that year. And Mike Ditka was on Sirius XM radio today, and he admitted, hey, that's why we won the Super Bowl, because of Buddy Ryan's defense. So even Mike will say that today, now that it's far in the past and they've got away from some of the personality difficulties. But it's clear, as good as Jim McMahon was and as fun as the refrigerator Perry running the football was, that was all defense, the Chicago Bears.
Right, and Walter Payton. So let me ask you this, John McMullen. Would Buddy's defense work in today's game, or in your mind, did it help change the offenses to what we see today?
Oh, yeah. I mean, people still use elements of Buddy's defense 30-plus years down the line. And it really is the aggressive part of it. You see the eight-man fronts. You see the hybrid players, whether it's Deion Buchanan in Arizona or Mark Barron in St. Louis. Everyone's looking for that type of player. Buddy kind of spearheaded it with, as I said, Doug Plank, different types. But the aggression, the constant pressure on the quarterback, the understanding that in this league, and it's only gotten more so to that point because of the rule changes over the past couple of decades, if you don't get to the quarterback, you don't have much of a chance on defense in this league. And that's what Buddy kind of understood long before everyone else. I think a lot of people forget, Pete, before the 85 Bears, the 84 Bears were the team that had 72 sacks, which was an NFL record that still stands today. So it was coming before 85. Everything just kind of came together with that team. In that year, obviously 15-1, very close to being a perfect team. Maybe the greatest team of all time, to be perfectly honest. But it was coming before that, and Buddy had a lot of success even before that.
And you mentioned that letter the players wrote to George Halas to try and keep him around. How special or touching was it in your mind that it kind of came full circle when they did that 30 for 30 and Buddy could no longer speak, but he sort of dictated or mumbled out a letter that he wanted read to his guys?
Yeah, and it's always sad at the end, but you could see, and even here in Philadelphia, and that's the one thing, defensive players, you know, some of the offensive linemen might have not liked Buddy because, let's be honest, he didn't pay much attention to the offensive side of the football. But as far as his players on the defensive side, to a man, they just speak so highly of him and just what a type of players coach he was. And it started with the swagger, and you kind of see that still today with Rex Ryan and the way he talks about always going after Bill Belichick, and even Rob Ryan, and the way they're so braggadocious. But Buddy started that. You could see the swagger. Certainly the Bears had it in all the great players. And here in Philadelphia, you could see it with the Reggie Whites of the world, the Jerome Browns, the Seth Joyners, all of those guys. And it all stemmed from the guy in charge of the defense, and that was Buddy Ryan.
John McMullen's with us. John, I mean, we remember him in Philly and in Chicago, most memorably, as we mentioned, the 85 Bears. But how did he get to the Bears? What did he do leading up to that point that made the Bears pick him to run their defense?
Well, it was the Vikings stint, and the fact that the Bud Grant Vikings were one of the great teams of all time that never won a Super Bowl. They lost 4 of them, but they dominated the old NFC Central. So it was sort of looking at your neighbor and being jealous and saying, look, this is one of the great defenses of all time. And Buddy's learning under Bud Grant and Bob Holloway, who was the defensive coordinator. The Bears said, let's try to take some of that magic away from the Vikings in our own division. And it worked beautifully. As I said, it didn't work immediately. It took a couple years. But after Halas decided to keep him and brought Mike Ditka around, as we mentioned, the 72 sacks in 84 and then 85, it's basically, you could ask everyone today, Mike, you should have if you have more NFL people on, say, what is the best defense of all time? And if they don't say the 85 Bears, it's going to be the second or third name out of their voice. I mean, everyone looks at that team and looks at that defense and says, this is the crux of where the best defense in the history of the NFL was played.
John's full story at todayspigskin.com on his trips around the NFL, which included stops with Buffalo, Minnesota, the Jets, and obviously Chicago, and here in Philadelphia, Arizona, and Houston as well. Well-traveled, 35 years in the league, 2 Super Bowl rings, and, of course, really, John, I guess you could say has molded the Eagle fan as we know it today, because the Eagles were lagging behind the other teams in the early 80s there.
Yeah, I think you're right. And if you think about that era. And think about the coaches in the NFC East, really, when Jimmy Johnson sort of turned things around in Dallas, and you had Joe Gibbs in Washington and Bill Parcells in New York, and obviously Buddy. That was the glory days of the NFC East when it became sort of the marquee division in football. A lot of it had to do with those head coaches, a number of them Hall of Famers, obviously. Unfortunately, Buddy was not as far as a head coach, but he brought respect back to Philadelphia football, and he brought an intimidation factor. And as I said, it's something that resonated in this city. It became the identity of the fan base, and I think it still lasts today in an era where it really shouldn't, because I'm not sure you can play the kind of intimidating football the Eagles did back then. In fact, I'm positive you can't. There's just been too many rule changes, and you can't just bring that the bounty game. Everyone remembers that so famously. Obviously, that couldn't happen in today's environment. But still, the Philadelphia fans kind of harken back to those days, and that's what they want their football team to be. And it's just really difficult to overcome. You look at Andy Reid and how successful he was, but it's pretty clear as who's more loved. Buddy's probably ahead of Andy,
No
and
doubt.
It doesn't make a lot of sense.
There's no doubt about that. John McMullen, for more on the Eagles' perspective, go to 973ESPN.com and check out his piece on Buddy as a whole over at todayspigskin.com. You can get them by following John at JF McMullen. All right, John. Thanks, pal.
Thanks, John.
Hey, thank you, guys.